Hey everyone, welcome to the Tripod presented by Transition. I'm your host, Alex Warmoth. Today I'm joined by Sonni Dyer. Sonni is a coach, mentor, former professional triathlete, and the longtime director of triathlon at Queen's University of Charlotte, where he's built one of the most successful collegiate triathlon programs in the country, producing national champions, Olympians, and pros. Beyond the collegiate world, Sonni has decades of experience developing athletes of all abilities and shaping the future of triathlon in the US. Sonni, welcome to the tripod.
Thank you very much, Alex. I appreciate it. Great to be here.
Of course. So, yeah, to kick us off, you started as an athlete long before coaching. I'm curious, what first drew you into endurance sports and triathlon?
Well, as a kid in middle school, I tried the long jump. That didn't work out so well. I ended up in the mile. It's the same story that a lot of endurance athletes find. I actually did play basketball, football throughout middle school and a little bit in high school, and then just found that, I gravitated towards cross country and track and field and was the captain of a state cross country championship team way on back in 1985. So, and then in the 90s, ran collegiately, first at Brevard College, then at East Tennessee State University, and then ended up transferring and finishing at Appalachian State University. But, like a lot of runners, my running career, keep in mind, this was back in the days when 80 to 100 miles a week was kind of the norm, right? And so, of course, I was one of those injured runners and I didn't immediately go from running into triathlon. I went from running into cycling, which I think ended up being a benefit later on, given all the NCA and draft legal aspects of triathlon as it relates to, triathlon as an emerging sport. The draft legal component really kind of suited the tactical awareness that I had to, have in
Hmm.
racing. So raced in Europe, raced domestically, professionally, um, and I was okay at going uphill, but I couldn't time trial, I couldn't sprint. So first started off doing duathlons professionally. That was back when there was a lot of duathlons. In fact, in the beginning, we even called them biathlons way back in the day.
Well, interesting.
Yeah, way back in the day, and they were run bike. They weren't even run bike run back then. So, and then transitioned into triathlon. So had been a collegiate runner, had been a professional cyclist, and so the obvious thing for me was I really needed to how to step up my game in the swim. And
Mm.
so, attended a lot of swim clinics, did the whole total immersion thing, ended up coaching on a YMCA pool deck in Cary, North Carolina. And that's really where I kind of began to craft my approach to stroke mechanics for people that did not grow up swimming, you know,
Mm.
because I think a lot of great swimmers do things with a stroke mechanic because they've been swimming from a young age at a long time. I learned swimming, really the technique component of swimming in my 20s at this point.
Mm.
So I had the engine from cycling, from running and cycling. I just didn't have the technique. So I had to be very intentional about learning. And then also, because I was a coach on deck, teaching technique as well. So I think it actually gives me a little bit of an advantage today because I can see where I was, as a swimmer. And then I got to the point, as a regionally elite triathlete where I could win local races, and I got my swim got better and better and better. And then I eventually had days where my swim was the best of my three legs, you know. And so from there, I think my 2000, 2001, 2002, and then my final year was 2003 with an injury and that kind of thing. And at that point, again, I competed in the Road to Athens Olympic series, which had some races down in South America, which qualified you for the Athens Olympic trials and things like that. But again, I wasn't elite Olympic type level. I was finishing like 11th, kind of thing.
Hmm. That's still really good.
Yeah, and this was the days of ITU races where we did not have full 75-man fields either. Back then, this was the keep in mind, 2000 was the first year that in Sydney, Australia, triathlon was an Olympic sport. So in the early days of ITU and draft legal racing, we might have 30 guys in the race, 40 guys in the race, and that kind of thing. And there was a level of swimmer that was well above where I was at. I could bike and run with those guys, but there was a level of swimmer that was well above. I mean, I was, I'm talking Hunter Kemper and Andy Potts were in a
Hmm.
race that I was in. And, those
Wow.
guys would get out of the water. And it wasn't like today where the main chase pack is 40, 50 guys chasing that group of three or four or five. Back then it was three or four or five chasing that group of three or four or five. And they weren't
Wow.
coming back. So it didn't matter how fast you ran.
Sure.
So anyway, transitioned from there into private coaching. And then I did that from full time from 1999 all the way up until 2014. And then in 2014, I was approached I was also coaching, I was director of a women's professional cycling team. And one of my former athletes was talking to advancement director at Queen's University of Charlotte. And he said, we want to bring on, at first he said, we want to bring on a cycling program. So I went to speak to them there and I realized, hey, you guys are in downtown Charlotte. Cycling is collegiate cycling is cyclocross, mountain bike, track racing. I mean, it's a lot of disciplines, right?
Hmm.
And at the time, they had this phenomenal, and still do to this day, this phenomenal swim program there. And then also at the time, David Marsh, who came from Auburn to Charlotte to run Team Elite and was the women's Olympic team swim coach, was also coaching in Charlotte. So I said to them, why aren't you guys doing triathlon here?
Mm.
And one thing led to another, and the next thing I know, I find myself a collegiate coach.
Wow.
And that's where that journey began. So that's the Cliff Notes version of how I got to, where I got to.
Okay. No, that's such an exciting journey. I'm curious, what makes Queens different from other collegiate triathlon programs?
Yeah, well, I mean, and honestly, I think from the outset, it was the first. It was the first NCAA grant funded collegiate triathlon program. And sometimes, it's not about the coaching or this or that. It's just that, we kind of pioneered this from the beginning as the first program and then saw it as like this could be a thing. Like, this NCAA triathlon can be a thing. What we need to do is we need to get 40 member institutions on board with adopting it as an emerging sport. And so my goal was to build the neighborhood around me. So, I helped start programs like Wingate University, Lenore Ryan University. I'm in the process of still even mentoring 5 NCAA coaches. And so one of my assistant coaches is now the head coach at LaSalle University in Philadelphia, and another of my assistant coaches is now taken over the program at Queen's University. So I always kind of prided myself in not just coaching athletes, but coaching coaches as well in the process of building the sport up at that level. Simultaneous to that at Queens, the model that we used was not just the varsity women's model, which is draft legal and team scored. You're racing at the national championships, 7 individuals, and you're scoring 5 of those, kind of like cross country, right? But then part of our model was also we have to make this work from a financial standpoint, and therefore enrollment is a piece of that. So we wanted to create a model at the club level also, which allowed men to compete at the highest level too. And so like we've had some studs come through our program.
Bet. I bet.
Yeah, and some guys that are really still there. I'm thinking, probably in the neighborhood of a dozen guys that have gone sub 4 hours for 70.3. And on any one given year, you know, 5 of them had gone between 347 and 353. So they're really on that threshold to making the jump to the professional ranks. Of those 5, like 4 of them are riding sub 2 hours for a 56-mile 70.3 split. That's
Wow.
pretty quick.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Averaging 28 miles an hour for 56 miles and then coming off and doing the whole thing in the sub 4 range in the 340s and 350s. So that was, and the collegiate medium for that is just perfect because you're taking these individuals who they're straddling the fence from adolescence to adulthood. they're at the peak of their physical capacity. But as we know, endurance athletics really kind of favors the older athletes, you know what I mean? Who are developing that mitochondrial density and that fitness and that power and that fatigue resistance. So just to watch them progress and become, like Max Sparrow is a T100 athlete. You know what I mean? He's at one point he's one of the best guys in the world. you know, at half Ironman distance and the 100, the new 100 distance and things like that. So,
Sure.
then on the other side, we've had our short course and our draft legal Olympians as well. Annabelle Knoll from Germany competed in Tokyo. Felix Duchamp competed in both Tokyo and Paris as well. And then Seth Ryder competed in Paris and was the leadoff leg for the silver medalist USA team for the mixed team relay. Yeah.
Wow.
And we'll have more.
That's impressive.
They'll have more Olympians as well. So yeah.
Sure. I'm really curious, what develops these athletes? Do you feel like it's more, there's always the question of like nature versus nurture. Like, do they have an innate ability above everyone else, or is there also something unique about your program that develops so many professional athletes?
Yeah, I think it's two things. And one of them is going to sound counterintuitive to you, okay? The first thing is the obvious is that it is the team culture of putting individuals together in a daily team training environment in a sport in which they grew up maybe doing this all on their own. And so, like, we've had squads and rosters at some point where we would have, out of, say, 40 kids, 40 student athletes, 19 different countries represented. And of those 19 different countries, these kids were all doing swim, bike, run. They were managing their swim training, their cycling training, their run training, sometimes with one coach, sometimes with three coaches per discipline, all of them in a different country, and all of them as an individual. And so here I am, not just taking 19 different nationalities and trying to make them a team. I'm taking individuals who have never been on a team, a triathlon team, and trying to cohesively make them a triathlon team. And there's a synergy there, that just exponentiates their training and their dedication. And it makes, let's just face it, triathlon training can be a grind, and it makes the grind much more bearable. And I see, if you may have one kid, I had a kid from Denmark who was a phenomenal All-American and collegiate swimmer. He was one of our he was like a 351, 70.3 guy from Denmark. And he was making other people better swimmers. Like what he was communicating to the other guys in the lane next to him was better than anything that I could communicate from on deck. And then I got guys who are, in the 400 plus FTP club. And they're taking other guys out who may be better runners, and they're making them better on the bike. And then, on a track day, I've got guys Matt Boutte ran low 29s for 10,000 meters, and he's making guys better on the track. So it really is this synergy by not just putting all of these athletes together from different nationalities, but putting them together from different disciplines where everybody's learning something from everybody else's strength. And it just becomes a really supportive type environment in doing that. That's the first thing. The second thing is what I realized very early on was that as a triathlon coach, I was dealing with the type of individual that you know what I'm talking about, right? The type A type individual. When you're a sport that has people still doing Ironmans into their 50s, their 60s, their 70s, using their vacation time and traveling the world to do it, like you got some very motivated individuals, right? So what I found is that is a necessity for our sport, but it's like anything. The very thing that is a benefit, it's a double-edged sword, can also train you into a pulp and a grind. And so oftentimes what I found as a coach is that like I didn't need to push these kids. More often than not, what I needed to be was the voice of reason that actually backed them back most of the time. And we used to have a saying, we train the weeks, not the days. Because what everybody wants as a triathlete, because again, everybody's super motivated, right? Everybody wants to have that great workout. And what they don't, in the pool or at the track or in the studio on the Wahoo or whatever, everybody wants to have that great workout. The problem with that great workout is if you get an A plus workout, you might have C minus workouts for the next 3 days. So all I wanted was, I would tell them, I would scream from the pool deck or the side of the track, guys, I want base hits. I want base hits. That's it. I want B plus workouts throughout. If I get B plus workouts throughout, I know that what we're going to achieve is weekly consistency. So
Hmm.
we're effectively what we're doing is we're training the week, not the days. You see what I mean? Because,
Right.
and again, every 17, 18, 19-year-old that comes into a collegiate environment, they want their trajectory like this. They want that trajectory to be straight up. They want that pro card tomorrow. You see what I
Hmm.
mean? And
Yep.
what I've got to do is sometimes I've got to take that trajectory and I'm going to go, hey, this is possible. You've got the willpower, the fundamentals of the setting and the infrastructure around you. We just need to dial the approach so that the trajectory looks more like this. Like this is going to happen, but it's going to take longer than you think. And we can't hurry this process because if we try to hurry the process, you're going to end up injured. You're going to end up overtrained. You're going to end up sick. All number of things. You see what I mean?
Hmm.
So a lot of time it's just about communicating the timing and the trajectory on the front side of these things.
Right.
So
One,
those two things. Yeah. The culture you create and then the expectations you create.
right. One question on that. So, you have a lot of talented athletes from different backgrounds, like you mentioned. How do you determine how do you determine someone's B plus versus someone's A
Yeah.
effort? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you
Yeah.
know really how hard to push someone, and how can age group triathletes also figure out how to do that on their own?
Yeah. That's a great question because, and I'm going to go off on a little bit of a soapbox here. It's a great question because we're so data driven today with our power meters and our training, our TSS, training stress score, or our heart rate variance. Or, I mean, you know, with their blood lactate monitors. I mean, there's any of number of ways to train and look at those data metrics, and they're useful. They are super useful, and we use them. But what I've also seen is that they can dull intuition. And so, like a lot of times, I may have somebody on the track. I can remember one instance as we were preparing for a national championship. I had a gal on our team, and we were running. We're in our final 2 week sharpening and taper phase for the national championship. And I had set the target 400s pace for every single individual on the team. And I had a freshman who was overrunning those 400s, running, in fact, those 400s with a girl who's like a 425, 1500-meter runner. That's pretty quick. That's a female, a collegiate female who's running, 440s for the mile, low 440s. And this was above the capacity of this freshman to do that. And I could see the strain on her face, and I could tell that she had disconnected her intuition of what she felt that pace should feel like with what her watch was telling her. And in fact, when I told her after 2 intervals of seeing this, hey, you got to dial these back. Like, we don't want to leave our race on the track, right? Our objective is not to have, you don't get better from the training you do. You get better from the recovery from the training that you do. And if you're digging the recovery hole deeper, you can have a great workout, but I'm not so sure that we're going to recover from that in time, right? So I'm telling her to back it out. And she's literally, after 2 intervals, she looks at her watch and she says, but my watch says that I'm right on target. So what she's saying there in that instance is that, this data device is telling me it's dictating to me what my intuition should be saying to me. You see what I mean? And so
Right.
A lot of times it's that this is where, that's coaching and athletics and endurance is both art and science. The science end of it is definitely the data side, but the art end of it is seeing what that strain on the face looks like, seeing how the stride changes in the last 30 meters of that interval, seeing what the recovery interval on the pool wall looks like. And are they fully recovered, or are we in touch and go territory where now stroke mechanics are going to begin to fall apart and those kind of things?
Right.
So
How
that's, I mean, art. That's the art side of coaching and performance.
sure. Yeah, I'm curious on the intuition piece. I think that's fascinating, especially with AI and devices. Like there's more and more things that are sort of competing with our own intuition. How, how do you develop that intuition as a triathlete?
Yeah, well, sometimes like if it's a recovery day, I'll just say, we're not even turning on the power meter today for the spin. Or if it's a recovery swim, instead of giving them, hey, we're going to do, 6 times 400 meters, and I want you to alternate between buoy, finger paddles, snorkel, fins. So I'm taking their mind, I'm putting their mind and their attention on a stroke mechanic and something they would feel maybe from a pool toy instead of the clock. I've even said, okay, we're not even going to do or let's call it 8 times 400 meters. We're going to go 8 by 5 minutes. So I don't even want them counting meters on those. I want them, I want the clock to tell me, okay, time to take a rest and then switch to the next interval. So there's all kinds of ways that you can take data out of it sometimes. But what's very interesting, and you mentioned AI, is that this is not just me and my theories of connecting intuition with data. I mean, if you look at what some of the Pro Tour cycling teams are doing, UAE and Tadej Pogacar's team, they have now employed a company called, ironically enough, Analog. And Analog is an AI platform that helps their professional cyclists and their coaches. These are the best. These are the best cyclists in the world. This is Tadej Pogacar and his team, right? And what they're doing is they're connecting the data with the intuition through and using AI to do that. And Analog is now a Pro Tour team sponsor of UAE. So yeah,
Wow.
it's the next thing, is because I think what we did was we pendulum swung so far and so heavily over into the data side of things, right? That we've begun to create intuition deficiencies in our athletes and things like that. So yeah.
How do you connect data to intuition? Like how do you capture intuition? Like as a third party, you mentioned
Yeah.
analog, this tool. Like how does that
Yep.
capture that intuition?
Well, so one thing that I do, and this is just me because I'm kind of old school and things like that, but like I write the training calendars by hand. I write them analog. Like I'm going to hide the name, but like that's what the training calendar looks like that I write. And as you can see, I'm writing blocks in advance, and I'm writing for continuity, and I'm writing for the macro phases because our physiology changes much, much, much slower than our psychology changes, right? And so we've got to wait on the physiology instead of just using the psychology. When somebody's writing a week and sending a week, and write a week, send a week, write a week, send a week, the problem with writing a week and sending a week is you're influenced as much by the psychology as you are as giving the physiology time to adapt. So what I'll do is, a lot of times what I do is we use the data, but I use the data after the workout as a feedback mechanism, right? And then before the workout, I'll say something like, we're gonna do a 3 hour ride today, and in the middle of those 3 hours, it's 3 by 20 minutes at your sweet spot, and your sweet spot should be comfortably hard. So what I'm giving them is I'm giving them intuition language, but then
Mm,
afterwards, I'm gonna go, okay, so what did that equal in terms of watts, in terms of
mm,
sustainable power and watts? So I'm not using the data prescriptively, I'm using it postscriptively as an analytic. And the more that you do that, the more you begin to synchronize the data with the intuition. You see what I mean? And when you've done that, now when someone is not having a good day, they're not going to follow the meter or the watch or the split, regardless of what their body's actually telling them. They're going to
Hmm.
trust the intuition side and dial the effort. And then if we come back and we see that those watts or those paces are lower for that day, then I can go, okay, great. Now we know that. Number one, you didn't bury yourself today. You listened to your body, because we're always saying
Hmm.
listen to our body, right? So you didn't
Hmm.
bury yourself today. You listened to your body. But two, now let's go back and let's look at did you sleep last night? Has there been some stress? Did you have a test? Are you fighting any kind of immune issue? Was the temperature 90 degrees today? Like, how did your diet go for the last 3 days? Have you had any GI distress? Like, any number of factors that are going to affect the the training medium that we're operating and training in.
Hmm. How do you, I'm curious on that point of these plans that you write out and obviously the high level structure that makes sense, but a lot of athletes struggle with exactly what you described. Like, oh, I missed a workout. What should I do tomorrow? Or maybe it's the end of the day and it's 10 p.m. and I haven't done my trainer workout. And I'm like, should I sacrifice my sleep or should I just crush it out and do the workout?
Yeah, yeah,
Inevitably, like life comes up in a number of different ways. And so, what is your suggestion to athletes? If they have a plan, what should they do when these things come up? Should they adjust their plan or just kind of wait it out
yeah.
or what's your suggestion?
That's a great question. It's really what the benefit of a coach is. Like here, I'm in the Southeast United States. We just had a nice storm, right?
Right.
I'm getting 5 or 6 texts from my athletes this week about how to adjust things because there are pool closures, and quite frankly, with all the ice and that kind of thing, it's really not safe to do those typical runs that we've been doing outside. I have an athlete that was supposed to do the Charleston Half Marathon this weekend. We just punted that away, and instead we've got a place where he can do a 10 mile. We're going to do a 10 mile time trial instead, and that will give us every bit of the data that we need in prep for a marathon that's down the road in March at Myrtle Beach. So yeah, I mean that we're changing those things in real time. Um, you know, I, just last night I had somebody call me and say, "Hey, pool's not open today until noon today. What do I do?" And then we make that adjustment. More often than not, I'm trying to keep in his instance, for example, I'm trying to keep that swim. So we're going to move it to the next day, but I've got other sessions that, quite frankly, are more important for the next day because it's a breakthrough day, whereas this was an active recovery session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the volume of that swim. So he's still going to get the swim, but instead of it being a 4,000 meter swim, we may just be in the water for 2,000 that day.
Right. Just for our audience, what you mentioned a breakthrough day. Could you describe what a breakthrough day is?
Yeah, yeah. So I kind of this is kind of an old school and again very very analog kind of approach to it, right? But we have active recovery days, we have days of break even, and we have days of breakthrough. And when you can categorize each one of those 3 days or three types of sessions, it provides the foundation for how you build a weekly micro sequence and what that looks like, right? And so I'm going to have days where my whole purpose for the day is simply active recovery. I need to absorb the training that we've got, right? The break even days, that's that zone 2 day and the whole world of 80%, 20%, 80, 20, right? 80% of your work is aerobic at zone 2, 20% is more intensive, right? That 80% is the break even, right? That's our break even days. The 20%, the breakthrough days, those are the days where we're pushing, right? Those are the days where I call breakthrough days. I view training in a ceiling and floor standpoint. We do some sessions that raise the ceiling. We do more sessions that raise the floor.
Mm.
We're either pushing the ceiling of our metabolic zones, our creatine phosphate zone, or VO2 max, we're pushing it up, or we're raising the floor. Our aerobic capacity, or even our threshold capacity, we're raising the floor. It's one of those two. The art in this, and this is why people should, employ a coach at some degree, is knowing when to change those, not just micro phases or each training week. That's pretty simple to create a training week, which is often based off your family schedule or your work schedule, or when you have access to a pool, or when there's a group ride, or when there's a track session, and we can kind of incorporate those things. But the
Hmm.
real magic comes in this, not in the weekly sequence, but in those big 3, 4, 5, 6 week training blocks, and knowing when to flip those. That's where
Mm.
the magic really happens. Because the body is adaptable. The body's going to adapt to the stress that you give it. So if your body's you apply a stress, the body's adapting. You apply a stress, the body's adapting. And you do that, guess what? After 3 or 4 weeks, the body is adapted to that stress as much as it is. Therefore, that stress is no longer creating new fitness as much as it's creating new fatigue. And so it's quite possible to go backwards. And this is the problem with people that want to stay at their peak fitness year round, right? Can't do it, right? Like, and I learned this, when I ran cross country in college. I remember beginning a season where I was running around 31 minutes for 10,000 meters, and ending the season where I was running around 33:30 for 10,000 meters. You know, why in the world should I be running slower at the end of the season than I am at the beginning of the season? Has nothing to do with fitness. I'm more fit at the end of the season. Has everything to do with fatigue, right? So
Mm.
I wasn't managing fatigue very well. So the key in this is knowing when you have adapted, when your adaptation to a particular stress is maximized, and now you're accumulating more fatigue than you are fitness, then you got to change the focus. You got to change the metabolic zone that you're targeting.
On that point on adaptation and these, 5 week, 6 week training blocks, what are how do you know when you've adapted, and what are the sort of knobs that get tweaked
Yeah.
in when you go into a training zone? Like, how do you know, I guess, when to do a new training zone, and then what are the things that change in that new training zone?
Yeah, usually it's when you begin to notice, signs of overtraining and things like that. Sometimes it's a lack of sleep. Sometimes it's an immune function issue. Sometimes it's just plain old feeling stale, a loss of appetite, a bad race. Any one of those things is usually it's an indicator that we need to change up the training and that kind of thing. It's been my experience that, most endurance athletes, again, going back to the highly motivated individual, they want the volume blocks to be very, very big volume, and they want the intensive blocks to be very, very intense. And there are some individuals that think that they can do both at one time, right? And perhaps they can for a period of time, but certainly not indefinitely, right? So every good push forward in your form is usually going to be preceded by some form of rest, you know? So you've got to allow the training to soak in. You've got to allow your body to adapt, right? And then you can change up the training focus, and then proceed on from there. So yeah, that's part of the art. Generally, someone else, a coach, would see it in you before you would see it in you. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
yeah.
On that point of, you mentioned active recovery, break even, and breakthrough days or workouts. I've even struggled with, maybe there's a VO2 indoor bike and it's like, ooh, maybe I missed that one, or I didn't quite finish it all the way. Versus, maybe there's a long 3 hour bike ride like zone two. Um, I guess my question is it worse to miss one of those breakthrough workouts versus a break even workout? I'm curious how you think about, if you miss a breakthrough workout, is it really important to actually reschedule that and get that back in? Because if you miss that, you're not going to raise the ceiling, or,
It's
how do you
far
adjust those kind of things?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, think about it from a percentages standpoint. Again, going back to 80-20, right? You've got to have that 80% foundation that brings up the aerobic floor, the aerobic base, right? Those take time. Those are counted in minutes, right? It's hard to make up those. Because let's say you had a 3 hour ride. Oh my gosh, now I've got to get this. I've got to carve out an additional 3 hours somewhere else this week to get that one in. On the breakthrough side, again, it's only 20% of your total training. But that session could be done in like an hour or less. You see what I mean? So I got a great example of this. It's like, again, here in the Southeast United States, we're covered in ice and snow right now. My session yesterday, I had 40 minutes, 40. That's not a lot of time to do a workout. I got on a Peloton bike and I did a VO2 interval of 3 minutes, then 4 minutes, then 3 minutes, then 2 minutes, then 1 minute. Done. After the 4 minute interval, I recovered for three. After the 3 minute interval, I recovered for two. After the two, I recovered for one. I was in and out in like 34 minutes. It's what I had time for yesterday. It's what I got, what I could do yesterday. You see what I mean? So far easier to get in the breakthrough session just from a time duration standpoint than it is to get in that break even session, which at zone 2 and at aerobic takes a lot more time. And the interesting thing is like if you look at the training stress score of a session, you can get a 100 training stress score in 45 minutes, or you can get a 100 training stress score in 3 hours. From a stress standpoint, a training stress standpoint, 100 was 100.
Hmm. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. I'm also curious for active recovery. You've mentioned a few. You've mentioned injury. You've mentioned, active recovery and knowing when to dial it back a little bit. For age group triathletes out there, what's your, what do you see that people often get wrong about recovery and their approach to recovery?
Yeah, well, number one, feeling that using like their active recovery as a data metric, I got to hit 150 watts because that's my zone 1 recovery. No, you don't. The focus is recovery. The difference between 150 watts and if you don't feel great, 100 watts is insignificant. So not focusing so much on the input, if you will, on a recovery day. The purpose of a recovery day is to recover. It's not to push forward one bit. You know, I like swims as recovery for a number of reasons. Number one, it allows you to get the heart rate up. Number two, there's a recovery effect of the water itself. Number three, there's a recovery effect from the body being horizontal and flushing out, doing a lymphatic flush and flushing out the waste product in the body and things like that. And it's very productive because you can focus on stroke mechanics and stroke technique. What I did with our NCA squad a lot of times on recovery days, if it was a bike, is get on the rollers. We're working, there's very little resistance involved, and yet we're spinning on the rollers at 95 to 100 RPMs. So we're working on pedal stroke, and at the same time you're working on, bike handling because you're balancing yourself on the rollers, and nobody's holding the phone texting somebody or on social media when they're on the rollers. I mean, I guess some people are, but that didn't happen very much. So there's all kinds of little techniques like that. Even, I mean, think of, and this is really where triathletes and multisport, I feel like in single sport communities really has an advantage and an edge, is the aspect of cross training. I mean, go back a couple of years, the top NCAA female distance runner in the country was Parker Valby. Parker Valby's doing 3 actual run sessions on the ground a week. The rest of her sessions she's doing on like an erg type elliptical type trainer. I can't remember
Hmm.
the name of that trainer, but like that's cross training. You know, I had a gal last year that set. She's an elite runner that set her 37 years old. She was a collegiate runner, and last year at age 37 years old, she set her 3,000, 5,000, 10K half marathon and marathon PRs. She ran 242 in Chicago, right? And we're riding the bike twice a week. We're not even running. And I've got her swimming on 2 other days of the week and incorporating some functional strength training, which puts her actual running at about 4 days a week or so. And she's lowered from the 250s almost 10 minutes down in the 242 range. And she's a low low to mid 16s 5K runner on running less, but using cross training as active recovery. You see what I mean? For lymphatic flush, for muscle tissue repair, for all those things. So there's tons of examples of ways to do that using multisport and things like that. So yeah.
Very cool. What are what's your perspective on full rest days? I've heard, I've heard some professionals don't take any. I've heard some take one every month or every couple of weeks, whereas maybe a lot actually do take, a Sunday rest day.
Yeah.
I'm curious your perspective on rest days.
I think in a perfect world, if you were a professional triathlete, not working a job, I mean, your job is to train and rest and that kind of thing. I think your rest day should look like an active recovery swim. Maybe you're off the legs completely that day with no cycling and no running, but you're getting horizontal and you're doing an easy drill focused swim. Interestingly, studies show that swimming short, quick intervals actually helps to flush out even a little bit better. So I say it's an aerobic swim, but there might be a 10-25s comfortably hard done in the middle to help that active recovery. And then also doing some functional strengthening and some stretching and things like that. So technically, in a perfect world of all you got to do is train, there's no off day because you're doing that. You're actively recovering on an off day rather than taking off altogether. Now, in the real world, where we're not all professional triathletes and that kind of thing, right? Yeah, we're synchronizing that with a work week and family obligations and things like that. So yeah, absolutely, probably should be an off day, But that's going to vary by the individual, by the type of work that they do. Is it very physical work, or is it desk work, or so that's a very individual thing. Yeah.
Mhm. So earlier you mentioned data and like this contrast between data and intuition, and you mentioned HRV, blood lactate, tracking your wattage on the bike. So you mentioned, how we should focus on intuition, but also that you do use data in some cases. I'm curious, could you tell us more about how you actually do use that data and how would you recommend, age group triathletes, use data?
Yeah. So in coordination with a coach, what I will do is on certain days, I'll put what's called CFD. CFD simply means coach feedback day. I don't need the data from every single workout that you do. I've identified key sessions that you're doing sometimes it's every week, sometimes it's every 2 weeks, sometimes it's every block, 3 to 4 weeks, whatever. On those key sessions, I'm going to insert a coach feedback day. And let's say that it's running. So I want data that is numbers, right? And let's just take an example: 6 times 1 mile repeat. Okay, 6 times 1 mile repeat on a 2-minute rest, and I want them done at your 10K pace, which is threshold / sweet spot. Okay, and I'm going to repeat that session every 3 weeks, and I want you to tell me, and I don't want you to go faster 3 weeks from now. So if you were able to run 6:05, 6:03, 6:07, or whatever for your mile repeats, right? On week 1, I want to ask you, afterwards, I'm going to ask you how that felt, right? I want to ask you how it felt. When we do that session again in 3 weeks, I want you to still run 6:03, 6:05, the same type pace, not increasing the pace. But after that session on your coach feedback day, I'm going to ask you, how did that feel? Because what I want you to say is, well, it felt easier than the last time I did it. Bingo. That's what we want. That's what we want. I think we can get into the temptation of thinking that progress means only that the data gets better. And what we're losing here is that No, another marker of improvement is not just that the data actually improved, the wattage, the pace per mile, pace per 100 in the water, but also that it got easier for you to do as well. You see what I mean?
Mm.
As
Now
we
is
get,
that
yeah, last thing, as we get 3 or 4 or 5 cycles into that workout down the road, then here's what's invariably going to happen. Hey, guess what? Today I wasn't even trying, but I ran 5:58, 6:01, 5:56, blah, blah, blah for mile repeats. And it felt just as easy as right. That's the win. That's
mm.
what we want. So,
Now is that how is that measured? Is that I've seen, you know, sort of the 5 point scale, or I've seen like RPE, like
yeah,
is it more tracking that kind of thing, or is it more sort of your subjective, the coach feedback day that you mentioned? Is it more free form, like where
very
they can really
subjective.
express?
Yeah, it's very
Okay.
subjective because, and here's another thing that I found. One person's 7 on the RPE scale is another person's 5.
Mm,
You know, and you can see this in like VO2 testing or substrate testing or lactate threshold testing. You know, the individual on a step test, the Bruce protocol step test, the individual's like, okay, this is easy. I'm at level 1. Then I'm at level 2. Then I'm at level 3. They get to around level 6 or 7, right? And then all of a sudden, instead of going through 8 and 9, they just immediately have hit 10 and they're done with the test. So what that tells you is that their intuition about those middle trajectory zones is not fully developed. They just went from 7 to 10. Well, you can't go from 7 to 10 without somehow getting a perceived exertion of 8 and 9, right? So yeah, everybody's 1 through 10 is different. So I just assume, I'd rather have the conversation about that and what that felt
hmm.
like to them, that kind of thing.
Sure. Now, do you ever use data to adjust workouts the next morning? Like this has happened to me, like I said, where it's getting late at night and maybe I skip a workout, or, I wake up and I'm feeling a little off, but I have a breakthrough workout. What should I do? And I've seen people talk about, HRV and the, overnight HRV. Do you have any opinions on how people should think about
Yeah.
adjusting workouts day of, and what intuition and what data should they use to make that decision?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, like, you can use what your training stress score was for a particular session or how easy or how hard it was to hold watts and that kind of thing. Obviously, if it's hard to hold watts that you've held before, then we're in a bit of a recovery hole. So therefore, instead of doing that breakthrough session the next day, maybe we need to back that down. But what's also interesting is the inverse of that is true as well. So maybe we had a session. I had a guy the other day or a couple weeks ago. I think they rode 107 miles at a really high average wattage, averaging like 22 miles an hour, kind of thing for 107 miles. He's getting the wattage on up there, right? Such a good session that I'm like, hey, that was a great session. Maybe we need to back down the next week because I'm predicting what that session is going to cost him before even he knows what's going to cost him. Interestingly enough, he did have an immune function after that session. So what that tells you is even though it felt great, it put him under a bit. You see what I mean? So all that to say, it's not just that when your numbers are off, you're gonna, opt for recovery afterwards. Sometimes the number was fantastic. We didn't train the week, we trained the day, and therefore I need to kind of spread it out a bit to back down a later session kind of thing. You see what
Right.
I mean? So and that's
Sure.
also especially important as you get close to races. Because as you get close to races, everything, we're tapering at that point, right? We're sharpening so that we don't get stale, but we're also tapering. So the volume's coming down. We should feel great. We should feel great. So a lot of times, the better we feel, the less I want you to do because I know from, you got legs at this point. We want to keep legs at this point. So let's just back down and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to, back up a little bit to something you mentioned earlier, which was the team culture at
Yeah.
Queens, and how, these peer groups supported each other and pushed each other. What can, I'm curious what, and maybe something else, maybe not just that, but what can most triathletes who are training on their own, 90% of the time at home or just wherever they are, what can they borrow or what can they take from that team approach to improve their own performance?
I think I have triathletes that instead of, because I want them to have an element of that inside of their training. I mean, there's a powerful social component to that that's very motivating as well. I coach a guy from Asheville. I don't even write his swim workouts. I write master swim because I want him to have that experience of masters swimming. And him being in that environment is more important than the session, the details of any session that I could possibly write him. You see what I mean? So, and it happens a lot with younger youth and junior and high school and middle school triathletes as well, who want to take part in, say, cross country or track and field or swim team. I want them to do that. There are a lot of coaches that are going to say, no, 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 you got to do my workouts, which is to say, no, 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 I want you training alone. That makes no sense whatsoever. I want those kids training with their swim team. I've got a girl that a high school athlete who's an up and coming triathlete. She's going to be running track and field for the Citadel next year, and she came from a swim background. I want her swimming her senior year with her team and experiencing senior night and relay and setting the school record in the 4x100 or whatever relay. Like, why would I rob her of those of those
Hmm.
experiences? You see what I mean? So that's the kind of thing that you can, even as an age group triathlete, finding those training groups to find and communicating with your coach about those. Hey, coach, I have the opportunity to do a standing Saturday morning track session with my local run club. Great, let's do that. Let's use that. You see what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
I write the workouts for the whole group. If you, for you and the whole group can do them if you want, or you can do what the group is doing, and then let's talk about maybe how to adjust those after the first few weeks of workouts to match what your goals, your specific goals are, and things like that. Group rides, having the ability to do group rides, training with a particular partner, spouses being able to ride and train together. I've got some athletes that want to train with some other athletes that I coach, so I try to synchronize their calendars as much as possible.
Hmm.
That's a super important to it. Otherwise, it's a lonely it's a lonely long grind.
Right. And not just lonely, but I mean, yeah, I've also I think fallen into this mentality before where it's like, you kind of feel some, oh, like I'm gonna grind. It's, doing it alone is hard, so that's gonna be what, I can grind through that and that's gonna be what sets me apart. But actually it sounds like, you still need that. You need that mentality sometimes, but the social component actually there's a lot more to it than
Yes.
just, oh, we're going and having a nice group ride. Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah.
it's not just that. It's you can learn from other people. They can push you. It gives you that maybe a little refresh from the grind. Um,
Exactly. It doesn't have to be every single session. You can have one master session a week or three or four master sessions with a swim group each week. And most of in the case of the athlete that I coach, the swimmers that he swims with are all post collegiate swimmers. They're not even triathletes. So I think there's some benefit in that as well. But same thing with a run group or a cycling group and that kind of thing.
right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So another question for you, for athletes who are looking to go from age group to collegiate or even to race professionally in Ironman or any of the different groups. You mentioned earlier the their first idea is this, like I want to race an Ironman professionally like later this year or next year. What do you feel is a more realistic timeline and common stumbling blocks that most people who want to do this don't anticipate?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's occurred with triathlon now is this segmentation of disciplines and segmentation of distances. I mean, let's think about it on the non-draft side. You've got T100, you've got Challenge, you've got Ironman, you've got like I'm missing some here, of course, but like there's lots of options and lots of different distances and that kind of thing. On the draft legal side, there's NCAA triathlon, and then there's continental cups, and then there's world cups, and then there's junior elite cups and things like that. So I think, with that segmentation, we're trying to put round pegs into round holes and square pegs into square holes, right? So we're trying to find, part of the process of discovery is find where you may excel the most and have the most natural inclination and discipline for, and sometimes that's a hard conversation. I would have athletes that come to Queens that were just dead set on extending their junior career of draft legal racing. And, I'd have to have a conversation with them that, maybe your best horizon and opportunity is in non-draft racing, not in draft legal racing. You know what I mean? So sometimes that's different, but it's a process of self-discovering, knowing yourself, and then understanding where your best path is going to be, right? That's not to say that we can't race those other disciplines and other distances. We surely can. But what we're gonna make the main thing, and really focus on where your best potential lies. You know what I mean? And so I think knowing yourself is the first step, and then accepting that this is going to be a long-term process as well is another step to it also. And
Hmm.
then just accepting that, if you're trying to do this for financial reasons, you got to look at those realities, right? I think what was there? A dozen athletes in the world, triathletes in the world I saw recently that made over six figures
Mm,
and prize money and things like that. So like, that's a pretty high bar, right?
right,
Yeah.
right.
So yeah.
I guess on that note, and just more generally, where do you see triathlon as a sport heading over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great, great question because, well, I mean, we got news this week that what is it, Ironman is extending the draft box to 20 meters now, right? So that's good because now non-draft racing is truly non-draft racing. I mean, because when these guys are averaging 27, 28, 29 miles per hour and in a 15-meter draft zone box at that speed, there's drafting going on. I mean, you can see it. You even see on the videos when the race ranger starts blinking, they're in the box. They might even be pedaling, or they've got to get through the box to take over, to do the overtake and that kind of thing. So I think that there's where triathlon as a whole is going. Let's keep non-draft racing, extending the draft box, at least for the professionals who are going that fast and throwing the draft behind them way back, way back. I think that's a positive. On the draft legal side of things, I mean, I think what we're finding is there's more super sprints, heats, finals. Look at what it used to be called Super League, but now it's called Super Tri. Look at what they're doing with broadcasting and indoor triathlon, and the team aspect, right, of Super Tri trade, and then what kind of viewership that's attracting as well. So I think our sport is maturing in that way. In that, I mean, it used to be it was just swim, bike, run, and everything was triathlon. And I would even have people ask, you know, at collegiately, your girls are doing Ironmans? No, our girls are not doing Ironmans. They're doing draft legal racing. What is draft legal racing? You know what I mean? So, yeah, so I think it's a good thing. I think it's a maturing of our sport. It's actually offering opportunities for a different type of triathlon. I mean, track and field is not one or two distances and events, right? So, you have 100-meter and 200-meter runners, then you have middle distance 400, or 400 is now a sprint, right? But at the middle distance, you've got 1800. Now they call the 1500 a middle distance race. way back in my day, that was like a distance man's race, right? It's no longer a
Hmm.
distance man's race. It's a middle distance race, right? There's 3,000, 5,000, 10K, all the way up to the marathon. And each has its own merit and takes a special type of athlete. But when you recognize that, you see that a sport is matured. And I think that's what's happening in triathlon is we're actually maturing as a sport.
Awesome. No, that's great. I'm excited for the future of triathlon. I uh, I wanted to go back to you as a coach for a minute and ask what's something that you believed strongly, 10 to 15 years ago or back in your career that
Yeah.
you've completely changed your mind on?
Whew, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess I've gone through phases of my coaching where it was volume, volume, volume. I did that as an athlete, actually, ended up injured and that kind of thing. And then the other end of that spectrum is intensity, intensity, intensity. And that's not the answer either. I think there's really a balance. That's from the nuts and bolts of training and things like that. I think more broadly, one of the things that my collegiate experience taught me was that I was actually the primary thing that I was actually teaching my athletes was swim, bike, and run. And what I realized was that that's about maybe 20 to 30% of what I was doing because I was working with individuals who were straddling that fence between adolescence and adulthood and that being a mentor on things that have nothing to do with swim, bike, and run was just as important as how I guided them in how to be a team. And we called it getting to four, you know. And I always used to begin each season with a team talk in which I'm trying to explain to them that like they're all coming from individual cultures and backgrounds and individual sport competition and things like that. And so that it was going to be very, very natural for us to arrive on campus on day one and be competing against one another because they're all competitive. That's natural. By the way, that happens in every sport, not just triathlon. That happens on a basketball court. That happens on a football field. It happens on a soccer field. People are competing for positions, for playing time. Like that's natural, right? But we can't stay there. We can't stay at against, right? We've got to get to a point where we're with one another. And sometimes with is collaboration, and sometimes with is toleration, right? Uh, but that our ultimate objective as a team to kind of even transcend the aspects of swim, bike, run in our sport was to get to four. And that was where we were competing and training on a day to day basis within the grind for one another as well. When we do that, I mean, you know, we won 15 national titles at Queens, six
Hmm.
NCAA titles. We won 9 collegiate club titles. We were the only mixed team in mixed team relay. We lost one time since 2018 at a collegiate club national championships in mixed team relay. Um, you do that by getting the entire team to four. It's we just saw it in with Indiana playing Miami, right? That
Mm.
Indiana football team, that's a brotherhood, man. Like that's a brotherhood that even transcends the sport of football, right? That's what we saw. That is what I wanted to get our teams to because that was the thing that long after their swim bike run careers were over, that's the thing that I want them to be left with. So
Hmm.
anyway, you ask about the what do I know now that I didn't know 10, 15 years ago. That's a biggie. Like that's probably one of the most impactful things for me as a coach.
Right. No, that's awesome. I'm curious. I've heard a lot of people say you should find your why in the sport, especially where, if you're training for an Ironman or, even competitive for a sprint or Olympic distance triathlon, that takes a lot of effort, a lot of consistency, a lot of effort, and a lot of discipline and motivation. And underpinning a lot of that can sometimes be like the why that you're
Yeah,
doing that.
yeah.
Do you have any advice for people to how do they find their why? Is that sort of
Yeah.
innate or is there any process to go through to sort of help you find your
That's a
true why?
that's a great question, and it's one that I think a lot of at least, with the collegians that I'm working with, that's what they're in the process of doing as they mature from adolescence to adulthood and things like that. But even on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, I've had athletes that lost, you know, 80 pounds, you know, and they used the sport and the activities of swim, bike, run, and strength training, and how they tweaked their diet and their nutrition and their lifestyle, and creating a habit and creating a mindset that was their why. That was part of their why. It's contrary to popular belief. I actually work with more age group athletes on a fitness standpoint than I do even elite level type athletes. So that was their why. In some cases, I've had athletes who used swim, bike, run, or their training to beat addictions, or to become a better dad or mom or parent, or or something to do from a marriage standpoint to be with their spouse, or to support their spouse, or as a model, a role model for their kids. What's interesting is the percentage of kids that I would have that would come in to our program at Queens whose parents still did triathlon. I'm talking about parents in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond who still did triathlon. And now their kid was, on our team, and mom and dad were still out there training and racing and coming to our races and supporting our program and sport. I mean, there's a why that transcends the sport there. You know what I mean? So I think for everybody, it's going to be different to find your why, but there is a why.
Definitely. Yeah, I feel like mine has evolved as well. When I first got into it, I was like, I really want to do an Ironman. I feel like
Right.
that's really challenging. I just want to finish it. And I trained hard for a year and did it. And then after that, I sort of struggled for a bit, questioning myself, like, well, actually, what is my why now that I've hit
Yeah.
that milestone? What is it now?
Yeah.
So it's been interesting seeing that evolve for me as well.
Yeah. It is interesting because when the why becomes the result and we accomplish the result, and you see this all the time with Olympic athletes at the end of a 4-year training cycle where they qualify for the Olympics, they make their Olympic team, they win the medal, they what. After that, it's like then you get the now what phase. Like now what, right? What's interesting and what I have found is that for most people to kind of get through that cycle was the recognition and the realization that it was about the process, not the end result. You know what I mean? It was about what the process did for you as a career professional in uh, in your own life, for your own health and wellness, in your relationships and things like that. Like, that's all process driven type stuff. So
Right.
it comes to why. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like a lot of the habits that you build training for triathlon definitely, overlap with things in everyday life, work, family, like having that discipline,
Yeah.
getting up every day, having a plan.
It's funny.
Um,
I've had clients, potential prospective clients, come to me. I'm not making this up. Okay. I've had clients come to me and say, I'm signed up for Ironman Lake Placid or Ironman Florida. And I'll say, oh, that's great. How many triathlons have you done? Never done a triathlon before. And I go, okay, well, so we're going to have to, gradually get up our race distances to that level. And they'll say, and oh, by the way, after I do this Ironman, I want to get the tattoo, or I want to show my buddy that I could do this, or blah, blah, blah. And then I'm never going to do another one. And at that point, I'm kind of like, I might not be the right coach for you. You know what I mean?
sure.
Sure, why is based off an event, it's based off of a result. And I'm not saying that the results shouldn't matter. The results should matter. They just shouldn't precede our why, our process. You know what I
Right.
mean? So, anyway,
Totally. Very cool. Well, I wanted to do maybe we can do a quick lightning round. Just,
boy,
I'll just rapid through just a few short questions and maybe just kind of, quick, shorter answers, and then we can close after that if that sounds good to you.
sure, sure, I'll do my best.
Okay. All right, let's get started. So, what do you think is one underrated training habit?
Ooh. That's a great question. Sleep,
Hmm.
sleep,
That's a
because
big one.
it's not the training you do; it's the recovery from the training you do, and the more studies that come out that. So I would classify that as a training habit.
Okay. What's one overrated piece of gear?
Ooh, gosh, overrated piece of gear. Power meter, and that's going to be controversial. I get it. Okay, I get it. I
We
understand.
got to dig into that really quick. What's your perspective on that?
Well, again, using it exclusively, and then reducing. On the one hand, I could say it's also in terms of pacing and race day and keeping up with training stress on a weekly basis and a macro basis, and me explaining to you what the intensity today should be. I can also make the case that is the most important piece of equipment for, let's say, a long course athlete. It's so useful that it could be overused and therefore is the most overrated piece as well. So let me qualify that. I'm not telling people to not go out and get or use power meters, but I am saying that it can be overrated.
Yeah, I think that goes back to your point about over relying on data too, of just, that is the only thing I care about and nothing else, and that can lead to some traps. Okay, another question. What's the best advice you've ever received as a coach?
Uh, uh, I would say that see your athletes uh, as people you love first and care about their performance is secondary to that. Like I call this servant leadership. You know what I mean? I feel like in terms of coaching, we are called to be. I'm not a my way or the highway guy. I'm just not. I've tried it. I'm not. Can't do it. I'm not. We're going to do things this way, and I'm not saying there's not decisions that need to be made but I'm more of a collaborator. And so with that type of individuals, I'll just tell our teams, this is not my team, this is our team, you know. So um, getting that
Awesome.
input and things like that.
Sure. And last one, what's one thing every triathlete should simplify?
Oh, their bike fit. Yeah, their bike fit. I'll speak to that a bit. I have trained people remotely, and they would say to me, well, I've had a bike fit. I got a bike fit at a local shop. And I go, okay. And then I would assume that that fit is great. And then I would get feedback 2 or 3 weeks down the road about quads and hips and knees and different things. And it might not even be on a cycling session. It might be on a run off the bike. And I would go, man, this really sounds a little bit like a bike fit issue. And I would say, hey, can you take a video for me of your fit and send it to me? Or take a photo, have somebody take a photo on the side? Or can we get together in a bike fit or this or that? And come to find out, it was me. I had made a terrible assumption on the front end that their bike fit was serving them and that it was clean. And so when you say to simplify, I mean simplifying it by having a qualified person check it on the front end because of the three disciplines. We swim and it is completely kinesthetic in a medium of imbalance and weightlessness in the water, right? And we are responsible for our self propulsion when we run, aside from shoes and yada yada. The bike leg operates with a machine, and we've got to integrate into that machine into our kinetic physiology instead of making our physiology match the machine. You see what I mean? And so let's just simplify it and make sure that it is optimally matching you and your physiology. Long way around
Awesome.
just to say bike fits are very important.
Oh, I love that. Cool. Sonny, well, this has been an incredible conversation. I just really wanted to thank you. Before we go, I wanted to ask you one last question, if you don't mind. And just for every triathlete listening, whether they're chasing a PR or just trying to balance life and training or thinking about coaching, what's one piece of advice you'd want to leave them with?
You got to have fun. You got to have fun. You got to listen to your body. You got to have fun. I know that those aren't new, pieces of advice and things, that you've probably heard before. You've got to value. See, you said one, and now I'm giving three.
That's okay.
Yeah. Um, do not underestimate recovery and and all the things that it takes for recovery. And I guess the way that I kind of said that earlier is, again, you do not get better from the training. You do not get more fit from just the training that you do. You get better from the recovery from the training that you do. So the recovery aspects of it, your nutrition, your hydration, your approach to electrolytes, your caloring yourself, carbohydrates, your protein intake on a daily basis, your strength training cycles that prepare you for muscular endurance that allows you to be more durable when you get into the season and therefore avoid injury. And then, of course, your sleep cycles, allowing yourself to taper before races. All of those things are right in line with the importance of recovery and valuing that, because that's what amplifies your training.
Awesome. Thanks
Long
for
answer
sharing
to a
that.
very simple question.
Cool. Where can anybody listening find you?
My email address is Sonni, Sonni, at coachsonni.com. And my coaching website is coachsonni.com, Sonni with an I.
Awesome. Well, awesome. Thanks again, Sonny. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. It's been great having you on, and we really appreciate your time. And yeah, thanks again for also everyone who listened to us and joining us on the tripod. And we'll see you next time.